topic of this panel is building engaged teams. Last year, a lot of leaders saw their teams struggling with staying engaged, with Zoom fatigue, and our work-life soup. I am joined by an amazing panel to explore and share how to navigate team engagement today, including making your remote environment connected, inclusive, and innovative. Quick intro of myself, I'm Suzanne. I'm head of enterprise marketing at Miro. Miro is a globally distributed team. So I have been leading in a remote capacity since joining the company about 2.5 years ago. One of my biggest and most favorite challenges is creating working norms to support a high-performing team when everyone is in different hubs or across many time zones. And in our case, this can be up to 13 hours. You already heard me mention a couple of the things that we found to help with that, like huddle boards. But I will be moderating the panel, and I'm so excited to learn from these product leaders who have so much to share about how they are reimagining teamwork and have adapted over the last year. I'll briefly introduce you all, and then I'll have everyone introduce themselves. So today on our panel, we have David O'Malley, Senior Director of Product Strategy at GE Healthcare, Duan Tai, Senior Manager of Journey Development at Cisco, and John Cutler, Head of Product Research and Education at Amplitude. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and do a brief round of introductions to kick us off. I'll ask you each to give a brief description of yourselves, your roles, and then for fun, tell us about the most surprising or interesting use case of Miro that you came across in this last year. John, will you kick us off?
Sure. Hopefully my audio is okay. We didn't have a chance to check it, but yeah, let me know if it's not working.
Sounds good.
So my name is John Cutler. I head up product education at Amplitude. Amplitude is product analytics, product intelligence for product teams. Yep, my day-to-day is actually talking with teams from around the world. So I actually focus mostly externally and get to chat with lots of teams around the world. It's an interesting perspective. Funny, we used Miro recently for a birthday card and had hundreds of people like create the board for the birthday and then surprise the person with the board. And it was a fun thing. So that's been the highlight, Miro fun highlight from the last couple of months.
That's a great one. We did something similar, I think, for a baby shower. It's a fun example. All right, Duan, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Duan Tai. I work at Cisco. We focus on collaboration products, which has a far superior web conferencing tool like WebEx. We have security products. We have enterprise networking. I'm lucky enough to be part of a digital transformation team, and we really focus on customer retention, growth marketing, and I have a team of about 8 people. For Miro, we like to use it as a team to shame each other. when someone has their Zoom too high or their board is a mess, we like to use it to tease each other. But yeah.
Great. And finally, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's David O'Malley. I'm Senior Director of Product Strategy at GE, and we're in the midst of our own transformation, working from a legacy project-oriented type organization to one that's more customer-centric, more product-oriented, a little more agile. And so it's my role is to work with the teams within GE Healthcare, globally distributed, to ensure that they have the right tools, techniques, the right training, and the right focus to be able to make that switch.
Great.
And as for Miro, we've really only been using Miro for about the last year or so. I think what's really surprised me about is the fact that I kind of gave people the 101 overview and the instructions how to use it. And it's really where some of these lean process mapping teams have taken this to making it a full workflow with included notifications to all other teams. It's really surprised me at how much people have taken this to the next level as far as functionality is concerned.
Amazing. Well, looking forward to learning more about that. Let's jump into some of the questions. I think let's start by talking about what we mean when we say team engagement and how this is different than, let's say, employee engagement, which you might measure if you were on an HR people team. John, I'll pick on you again. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the best way to maybe pick away at that is that you could imagine a company doing an engagement survey, an HR engagement survey, and actually ranking very high in terms of employee engagement. And they're measuring maybe the employee's relationship to the company as a whole, and then also their direct manager. That's like a popular, idea that you stay at a company because of your relationship with the company and then your direct manager. You can actually see a company ranking very high in those measures in a lot of these surveys we get, but actually not be very good at assembling high-performing cross-functional teams. And so I'll pass it to the others for more thoughts, but that was my first thought, that just picking, using that idea that you could rank very high in engagement, employee engagement, but then still leave a lot to be desired in terms of how teams are collaborating, and teams are gelling, and teams are forming. That's probably a great way to get to team engagement versus just pure employee engagement, would be my first guess.
I think just to follow up on what John said there, I think, we've actually just come off an engagement survey that HR has run here at GE Healthcare. And I think it is interesting because it covered definitely the two parts that John talked about, which is, are you connected to your work? Are you getting the necessary guidance from your people leader? But then it actually delved down into some of the team dynamics. Just one or two questions, about your connection to your teammates that you might have. It is difficult in an organization like GE, and I'm sure Joanne might be able to relate to this as well, that you could have part of your team located in one time zone and part of your team located in another. And so it does, when you talk about cross-functional teams, sometimes those functions are separated by time zones, and it just makes things a little bit difficult. So I think I am glad to see that at least HR, where I sit anyway, is actually starting to take a look at not just the two top levels of engagement, but moving down into the next one. It seems to be important for them, and I think it is actually important for our organizations and our teams.
Yeah, good point, David. I think just for those working at a big company or in a cross-functional role, there are multiple teams that you're a part of too. So the engagement, you may not be engaged with your own team, but you may be really engaged with other teams. And I think those numbers, John mentioned earlier, just engagement with the company, like I think you have to look at just your multiple roles at the company and the multiple teams that you're in.
Dorian, how is team engagement connected to your org's ability to innovate and transform?
Yeah, I think it's everything. For us with digital transformation, it's very hard work that is relying on so many different people, and being at Cisco, which there's a person for every single role. You can't innovate by yourself. You just don't have the means. Like you can have the idea, but maybe you can't execute it, or maybe you're in an execution role, but you don't have the idea. So it's something you can't do yourself, and just by design, the company just has to be very collaborative, right? So it is essential, and our ability to innovate and transform is tied to just our ability to work together and as a team and grow together.
Absolutely. John or David, do you have thoughts on the same topic?
Feels, to echo it, feels like everything. But I think, one thing Dawn mentioned, which I think is related to that question, is this idea of overlapping circles of teams. I think that, we could deride the idea of like the matrix structure or anything a lot. And there's a lot to, pros and cons for those things. But I think anyone involved in at least my field of sort of product development, product management, and innovation in that area really intrinsically understands that they're part of multiple circles of people. That's just sort of part of how we're working now. And so to take it to that little next level, it seems like our ability to navigate our kind of citizenship with multiple teams and then juggle that is probably, maybe sort of a meta view of it, is also pretty, important for our ability to innovate. You can certainly see examples of companies where it's like, oh, we'll create an innovation lab, and those people go off and you never hear about them from a year, and you never productionalize what they do. And it's just kind of like the pet project area for the CEO to do that. It's the integration of these ideas across the org and across the different teams that we're citizens of that I think is also pretty critical to the scaling of innovation versus also just keeping it in a bubble. So it's complicated. We're in very complex socio-technical systems where we're working. So yeah, I would say it's critical on many levels.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think like the interesting part of that question is that you have the word transformation in there. And I think that that's a part of our transformation when I look at it, you know, again, the behemoth that is GE. You know, what were we really, really good at one time? We were excellent project managers. And the idea was that, you know, some person, you know, one person would do one thing, then another person would do another thing, and, you know, it would flow. And the core competence, the fantastic skill that we had was a project manager to manage that flow of work from one end to the other. The world just got too complicated. It just got too complex. There were too many variables to manage. And so a part of what we're trying to do is move to an area where there are literally no ivory towers of thought. And I mean, if you can boil innovation down to one thing, it's making sure that there is no innovation, there's no ivory tower of thought, and that everybody can contribute. Now, you can only do that by actually creating the culture and the mechanisms and the playing field so that people can contribute. And you need engagement for that. You know, I mean, so it's not like one comes before the other. If this is your goal, you've got to make sure that you've got your field in play or your house in order to make sure that people can contribute to that. And that's the process that we're going for.
Yeah. John, I like how you called out scale, because at Cisco, when we build something, you can build something really awesome, but if you aren't able to engage with others and share that out, it never grows and it goes away. And then someone else comes in, they may grow that same idea and grow that thing, right? So it's interesting in how you can engage your own team, but how you can engage the other teams, because we're just one small team in a bigger org. I know some folks on the call may be on a smaller team, and the impact may be easier to make. But for big companies, I think just in companies in general, like getting buy-in from everyone, the innovation, I agree with David, it's probably never centralized. It's going to come in different pockets, but how we work together to connect those things to build something greater, I think that's the magic.
On the topic of innovation and transformation, some people advocate for team discovery instead of the teams executing on a top-down vision. John, can you share your thoughts on that? How can teams transform discomfort and the ambiguity of building something together from scratch into creativity?
It's an amazing question. I think it's actually probably one of my top 3 or 4 challenges speaking with teams, where there's so much pressure to pre-converge on ideas. I mean, it makes people more confident. You get to show a confident roadmap. You get to show confident plans. The engineering managers can allocate the right engineers to that particular project. The design managers can play Tetris with their team to try to figure things out. But creating these almost kind of messy, uncomfortable environments where a team can, the analogy that I use is, in horror movies, where initially in a horror movie, there's the one person who sort of discovers the crazy thing in the town or whatever, right? And then there's that moment when the gang forms, especially in kid horror movies, right? And all the kids go back to the haunted house together, and they open the door and like re-experience the problem together. And so in my work, especially, it's trying to figure out how to create that serendipity and a little bit of fear is not the word I want to use, but engagement, like when that part of the movie hits, everyone's super, super excited. And so I think that it's uncomfortable, and it's not something that teams practice, and it's not something aligned with any incentives that managers typically have in place to like be certain. So I don't, the only thing I can say is practice. I remember meeting with 20 to 25-year-olds on their first job in a van, going and staying with a customer for a week, engineers and designers. And this blew their mind, and everyone was very uncomfortable, and everyone wanted to get back to typing, and everyone wanted to get back to Figma, and everyone wanted to get back to what they assumed work was. And now, 5-10 years later, people are like, that's one of the most rewarding experiences I had as a team. I needed to have those experiences to become a great, product developer and great customer centric thinker and those things. So it's just hard. Leaders need to be like, it's very uncomfortable. I don't know any other way to say it.
Like the haunted house analogy.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I think what really is, when you start talking about team discovery and things like that, I have found that one of the critical items to getting people moving forward is ownership. So, stop me if you've heard this before. Stop me if you've heard the word accountable being thrown around and holding people accountable. And, you'll see RACI maps and things like that go out there. But really what you're trying to do is create that sense of ownership amongst those who you are expecting to deliver, right? To deliver the experience. And I just think that's something that we don't really focus on enough. And I think inclusion gives you that. I mean, if somebody arrives in and says, here's the hill we're going to take, or here's where we're going, but you have given absolutely no ownership or no kind of idea of autonomy as to how to get there to people, they'll just march to your drum, you'll tell them what to do and they'll do it, which is probably one of the most dangerous things that can happen, because now you've got back to this ivory tower of thought and this, everything else. So, creating those structures that allow people to participate. And I've seen some really progressive leaders here at GE who knew the answer, who knew what they wanted, but they still went through the process of allowing others to create the answer. Because for two reasons: first of all, to check if they were right, and second of all, is to drive ownership of ultimately where they were going to go. And they were aligned very, very well, but the team came out of it feeling like they owned a part of their destiny and where they were going with things. So it can't be measured and it can't be underestimated.
Yeah. So something interesting that David brought up was accountability. And for our team, like something that we do is we call it a buddy system, right? So everyone is accountable for their certain part, but there can be a lot of burden, a lot of pressure, or just maybe them taking over like an idea and coming up with a strategy themselves, right? So with the buddy system, we do feel like you are accountable for this, but if you bring someone with you along, then that helps have them be included. And then now we're getting different points of views and perspectives. So when that is shared out to the team, now you have sort of just like someone there who's already bought in, and it makes it a little bit easier versus like I think John mentioned earlier, like if you went away for like a year, you came back and you built this thing, like it's kind of hard for people to get on board with that sometimes because they don't feel included or they didn't really know what it was that you worked on. So the buddy system has been big for us.
That's great. You all have touched on inclusion. What is the difference between engagement and inclusion, and how are you creating space for different working styles? David?
Yeah, I'm kind of banding this around. I'm not sure if, the kind of way, I'd love to hear John and Don's thoughts on this. So I quickly wrote down on a note, engagement is the action, inclusion is the strategy. So we are, it's interesting here at GE. We look, GE Healthcare and GE in general, diversity and inclusion is a top level metric that gets measured by our CEO and the CEO of all of our businesses, all right? So there is a commitment to actually making it happen. We've brought in Chief D&I Officer. So this is something that we walk through quite a bit. Now, making sure that we have, a workforce that's representative of the community that we serve is something that's going to take a little longer because we got to go through hiring cycles. And, in a manufacturing industry, you may or may not be in a hiring cycle at this particular point in time. But inclusion is something that you can do now. It's something that you can absolutely do now. And so I think that, we want to create more inclusion in the direction of the business and how we make decisions and allow our leadership the space to be able to listen and to engage in an inclusive manner. But I think, that's hard. That's the engagement is the day by day, week by week, month by month. process of making sure that we are including people at every level. It could be including socially, it could be including from a career perspective, it could be including on your product roadmap or your retrospectives or whatever that is that comes next. And to some degree you can't do it, but I think that you can actually create better levels of inclusion, probably all the way through the company. And so that's my take on it. I would love to hear what John and Doan have to say, what if they interpret those words slightly differently. Doan, I'll call on you.
All right, cool. I was gonna wait for John, but yeah, no, that's it. Inclusion's a big thing for us. We are on calls all day, and my team's just a remote team to begin with. So the way we work and the way we include each other in these meetings, it can be as simple as kind of what David just did, right? Like he called on me, I answered. That's part of him including me. And I think it's easier when it's a small group, but when it's a big group, you really have to be mindful of just the folks on the call, what they represent, and if like we've had people on the call who can just speak for the whole hour, the whole 30 minutes, right? Yeah. So you kind of have to do your part in making sure folks are included and they're not just on to listen and they jump off. So that we feel like we're at our best when there's a lot of voices, it's less, of one person talking. That's kind of been our measure of success for that.
Yeah, not much to add. I mean, I think, I heard something last year that made me so sad, and it was a leader in Silicon Valley basically arguing for a monoculture at their company as it being more efficient. No. If we bring in people, and you could tell they were skirting around the issue of DI, like they were sort of talking about work styles, so that was their kind of coded word.
Yeah.
And it was basically built around, if we can build this monoculture, well, if someone's a parent, well, they're not going to put in the late hours. This was just this, and it left me so distraught, thinking that this person was not self-aware enough to really be picking up on what they were saying about product. And so I think, the way at least we think about it at Amplitude is that, and we think about this with our customers too. Our product is meant to sort of enable these cross-functional teams, but we really, really do try to take it to heart that diversity also manifests in like better products. It manifests in better, yes, it is harder when you get a team of different thinking styles and stuff to kind of gel maybe initially or become quote unquote efficient initially, but that the end product is so much better in terms of accessibility, in terms of thinking about our customers. So yeah, that's my garbage disposal. This is work from home. So I'll go on mute for a second.
I think that's been mathematically proved, John. I maybe would struggle a little bit to find the economic paper that's right on my browser right now. But if you research that, companies that are more diverse and more inclusive have better profitability, right? So aside from just being the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. I would say, Dawn, I like the way that you called out the HIPPO, right? The highest paid person's opinion, or the especially what's difficult now when we're in sort of distributed areas is getting people to put on their camera and then speak. That might have been difficult for those who weren't extroverts in the first place. It's gotten a little more difficult now. We use Miro quite a bit. We use the Together Alone system, which is you've got a time box, you write on your Post-it note, and it speaks for itself. There's no conversation. So it's not until everybody gets to present their Post-it note, kind of like what we see on the board here right now. It's got no name on it. You get to contribute your opinion. And if it's a good opinion, or if it matches with what we're trying to do, it'll get upvoted. It'll get the dots. And we'll run with it. And in that regard, you've kind of given people automatically this mechanism for contributing in their manner and their thoughts without making it judgmental, without making it, making it the HIPPO or making it the loudest voice in the room.
Yeah, I never heard of the term HIPPO before. That's pretty cool. But yeah, it's interesting. Like when it comes to collaboration or just these things, like you think of just meetings that you're in a day, and as a leader, you can really create that space, and that space may not be on the meeting. And I'm glad you called that out, David. Like some people aren't comfortable with speaking, and they'll never be comfortable with speaking, and you can't force them to speak. But when you have a Miro board and they have time to absorb what was discussed in the meeting, or just, you know, they have a place to channel their thoughts and creativity for others to see and for them to share. I think that's kind of like the cool thing about a tool. Like a tool is just a tool at the end of the day, but how you incorporate it into your daily life and creating opportunities for, you know, creativity and collaboration. I think that's the beauty of it. By the way, okay, I sorry, I want to give a shout out to Matthew Bradford. He has a Windows XP background. I haven't seen that thing in forever, so it still looks good.
Hey, your security department wants a word with you, by the way.
Service Pack 2, Service Pack 2. That's all you need is Service Pack 2, and everything will be all right. Right. I'm dating myself.
Yeah.
I was just going to comment that we even saw some of that happening in the icebreaker with new sort of back channel ways to participate. I think one of the participants here, Zachary, was providing really valuable input, but not necessarily by unmuting himself. So a lot of new opportunities to contribute without necessarily needing to be extroverted and having the spotlight. The theme throughout a lot of the things you just touched on has been sort of inclusion and ownership and agency, which I think often requires, you know, a culture of psychological safety and trust being a really big component of leadership. And how have you built trust, especially in, you know, currently remote environment? What are you doing as a leader to build trust on your teams and with your teams? What are your thoughts on that? David, will you share to start?
Yeah, look, it's hard. Look, I will be honest with you. It's very difficult. It also kind of depends on the industry that you're in as well. You know, so look, some of the simple things is more transparency, right? Okay. So calling out right at the beginning of the year, you know, these are the metrics by which we measure ourselves. This is how we know if our company's doing well. And then checking in quarter by quarter, say, oh, and here's how we're doing against them, right? So being able to, you know, work with your teams and develop for yourself some sort of transparent goals and mechanisms that talk about how you're doing as a team or as a person or as an organization. And one of the things that, you know, that we specifically have is this concept of embrace the red. So, you know, you might have your red, green, your orange and green, or your red, yellow, green, or your traffic lights or some sort of system like that. It's about highlighting the red and saying, yeah, I own this. I know it's not right. I know I've got to put a remediation plan in place, or I've got to do something to address this. Being able to ask for help on that, and then getting the feedback back, or getting, you know, the required help that you need in order to do that. But it starts with the bravery to embrace the red. And like, look, that comes from the top down. That comes from Larry Culp, who is implementing a lean transformation across the company in general. And he has said, well, I don't see red on your board. It means something's wrong. I want to see you embrace the red. And so I think there's, you know, attitude reflects leadership. So, you know, give the attitude that you're expecting to see in others, and they will find the ability to embrace that and show that back to you themselves.
John or Duran, thoughts on building trust?
Yeah, I was talking with a product leader about this recently, and I kind of brought up the old like trust formula. So the trust formula is trust is equal to credibility, reliability, and authenticity divided by perception of self-interest. So credibility, you're credible in what you're doing, reliable, you do things that you're reliable in your promises that you keep, and you're authentic in the way that you present yourself, divided by the level of perception of self-interest. But what I find super fascinating about that is shifted to remote. Think about all the things that remote challenges in that. and then the opportunities that exist. So for example, let's say you're in an office and your boss goes into a meeting with the C-suite or whatever and comes back with a smile, a very relaxed look on their face, and it transmits the message to the other 15 people in that bay, like things are good, like things are not worried. Or let's say they come back and they do a quick huddle of people and ask them a couple questions. They're like, oh, that probably came up in that meeting, and now they're talking with us about it. So that's an example of now shift into remote, you don't hear from that person. You didn't see whether they were smiling or frowning. You know that they were in a meeting with the board or the C-suite. Then they say something, maybe they're taking care of their family, but it seems like they're just bailing. I've had to deal with things with my toddler and have appeared unreliable. And I've had to communicate that. So I think that's one helpful frame for people, is to think about, if you're a newly remote company, especially during a pandemic, are you inadvertently slipping into situations where your credibility or your reliability or your authenticity are being affected, and or your perception of self-interest is being boosted through the roof for whatever reason? And that's usually going to help you with trust. I'm sure, maybe someone could, in the chat or whatever, or on the board that you have, just think for a second. It's like, how has remote challenged any of those things? And that's usually a good clue for where to focus, I found.
Yeah, trust is an interesting term, because I think of trust and what I do at work. It shouldn't be any different from what I do outside of work. And one of the words that John used was authentic. And I just love that word, because it's how you show up. Like, you can only fake it for so long. Like, if I just met Suzanne and, try to present my way a certain way, like at some point, it's going to be really hard to maintain that, right? So it's just easier. Like we tell, I have 2 young children, I tell them just be yourself. And when you're yourself, it helps build that trust. And there's things that, you'll learn from the other person, and they'll learn from you. And then you kind of just build that trust. But like, I think a lot of us can just detect like BS, right? So it doesn't, like, as a leader, I just kind of go with how I am, how to work at work, and it's just consistent. Like, communication's key. So those are just some of the words I associate with trust.
Yeah, I think, like, I'm just not to harp on it. And John and Dawn like nailed that there, but you got to remember, trust is given. I mean, you can talk about I earn trust and all that kind of thing. At the end of the day, it's viewed through another person's eyes. And it comes down to your actions to some degree. If you're, it's hard to earn, but it's easily lost. So it's just the repetitive behaviors that you have to put in place. And you've really got to approach it. I think you got to approach it from a principled perspective. So, I mean, we could probably spend another hour just talking about this, but I think it's kind of one of the things you have to learn the hard way.
One thing that it just came to mind with that is, the question is, I've lost trust. And I think there's actually research, in behavioral economics. A lot of that's been disproven, but okay, the stuff that hasn't been disproven in behavioral economics, that trust is built through small promises regularly kept. And so it's not about the peak end rule, so the peak end rule would be like, there's different biases, but if you sort of go through the year and you keep a huge promise in March and then keep no promises through the end of the year, that doesn't really help people, right? So it's about these small promises regularly kept. I think that the huge point there for the leader is what is the narrative of your promise? If I promise I'm going to finish X by Y in a complex situation, and that's literally not a promise anyone should ever make, because the likelihood that I can predict that is 0, I'm setting myself up for a promise not regularly kept. But if I make a promise to my team for transparency, or always shooting towards a true north, or making regular progress on something, if that's my promise, that's a promise that we can keep as a team. So that should be really, from the leader's standpoint, is, are you making promises that can actually be kept? And are you making promises that are, regularly, you're able to keep these promises regularly to kind of rebuild that trust? And so that's the that's the puzzle, obviously, but just adding that kind of small promises regularly kept is usually like a decent approach versus big bang promises.
Yeah, and when all else fails, then just throw an expensive team building event.
But if we don't have the money to throw an expensive team building event, don't.
No one's traveling. Of course you have the money. You're not paying for like $700 salesperson, dinners or anything like that. Like,
spot the guy who isn't in the manufacturing industry.
Oh, you're like, we still are. We're on private jets everywhere. Okay.
We got rid of those too.
Right.
That's a good transition into my next question, which is more specific. What are you all doing to engage your team? What are the frameworks, rituals that you found working, especially in a distributed or remote environment in a pandemic? Tell us a little bit about what teaming and engagement looks like within your respective teams. Joanne, will you kick us off?
Okay. I hope someone on my team is on the call who joined, but I experiment all the time just with different things, and some of them are pretty wild. Like, I don't know if you guys listen to Kiss FM, but Ryan Seacrest has this segment of Tell Me Something Good, right? Like, I'll just think of like segments like all the time, just ways to engage a team. Like, we do something as simple as like, if you guys are in grade school, if you ever done like popcorn, where to get people engaged, I say something and then I'm like, popcorn Rachel, and then Rachel shares her part, and it's like popcorn Gordon, and then we kind of just, that's a way of getting everyone involved. We just do a lot of stuff that is more just keeps people engaged throughout the meeting. And some meetings are pretty long. Like, we prefer longer meetings than short ones. Like, instead of a 30-minute or hour team meeting, we'll do like a 2-hour one, because just there's so much, and I really think of it as like a production. So, when you listen to a podcast, like there's like act 1, act 2, or just how they stage, or there's like, you watch like an ESPN show, they have these little segments within a show. Spend a lot of time really crafting that formula. So we do experiment a lot to see what works, what doesn't. And then once we kind of figure out the formula, then we can use it. And then people have some predictability that they know what to expect on those meetings. And then they can participate better versus, jumping on a call and like someone's, talking for a while. They don't know what's happening. They don't know when it's transitioning to the next thing. Like, just putting some titles and some like fun like ideas around it. Then the second time around, they'll be more active. Maybe the third time they'll like lead a part, right? So you have to give them time to like grow into the meeting, into that engagement.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than that calendar invite with no context. So
I hate that.
It's great to set the norms and the expectations for people to prepare and get comfortable. It's a great tip. John or David, what are your team norms look like?
I can give a couple. I think one thing that we realize, obviously, this is like a pandemic. I mean, there is the amount of trauma that people have been. It's I mean, not to get too personal, I have a toddler and he had health issues, and we ran right up into no sleep for 2 years, right into the start of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've been carrying this through for 3 years, right? So this is almost 3 years now. And so, we have these moments where we just break down. I mean, I cry, like we cry as a family, like this is so difficult. And so I think that the first realization that this is sort of defies the like team boosting thing for our team, that there needs to be time where it's kind of like grieving and trauma processing time to do that. And so what that looks like is just blocking out. One thing that we did was hold each other super accountable to taking time off. Very, very practically, we have an unlimited vacation policy at Amplitude, and the metrics said that no one was taking their vacation. Vacation usage was down like 75 to 80%. And especially among parents, and especially people who it's big production to normally take a vacation, they're not going to do it during a pandemic. They're not going to escape away to a mountain house or anything like that. So some of the things we did initially is like keep each other super accountable for taking time away, 1. 2, also just blocking out unstructured time where the agenda of that time could be set at a maximum of 24 hours before that time, which is kind of counter to what Dawn was saying. But it's this idea that like, you just don't know what's going to pop up each week, and you need to leave slack in the schedule. Like if your calendars are packed like Tetris and it's a pandemic and you're on Zoom calls all day, you're going to burn out in no time flat. So really forcing the idea of unstructured time that could be used for collaboration, could be used for just chatting, could be used for anything, but being really like diligent about that is that one thing. So forced vacations, totally unstructured time and blocking it out. And then, I think on a higher level too is engaging the team in the experimentation around this situation. Agency is super important. So if your company is suddenly springing on you all these team activities, you're processing trauma, you're spun around from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, like, oh my God, we're doing wine tasting. What the hell are we doing wine tasting? Like it's Thursday after, all these efforts to try to engage people sometimes mask the agency. So you really need to involve the front line in their own experiments. So do a retro, surface the problems that people are dealing with and the opportunities, and then just put in. One of the big things is what I call limit change in progress. We already have enough change in the world right now. So CIP is change in progress. And like, if you're just running one experiment as a team for the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, that's enough change that people can process at the moment. So we really try to stay diligent with our retrospectives and keep them very open and empowering for people, and then give them agency over the experiments that we're running, and then reflecting on whether they're working. So kind of like the meta approach to continuous improvement, because the worst thing is that these sort of experiments on high keep hitting you from all parts of the company, trying to deal with the pandemic, and you really just need to sit and just process this with someone else. So those are 3 that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, well, so first of all, I'm going to take some notes on how to, from Dawn on, how to make my work a little more enjoyable for people to go through. And on John's side, which is the other bookend, is make sure that I'm looking after people better. I think it's, to both points, like we do want to just kind of create a place where you want to go work and that's enjoyable and you kind of feel you feel a part of, right? And so we've done a few little kind of cute things when there was a message that I wanted everyone to consume and it was just another message, it was just another email. I created a cocktail and shared that with everyone. Now the message was subliminally held inside the cocktail, how you're going to craft your vision in a standard way. But I actually got more responses saying, hey, that was quite tasty, actually, thanks. But to John's point is, that should not be extracurricular. It's not like do your job, and do this other team building thing as well. It just becomes work.
Right.
It is. I mean, it is very interesting. Recently, at a sort of an all hands that we had, and we don't have a lot of time for these, people's times are precious. And again, our core operating hours really are kind of go from sort of central time to India standard time. So you really only have about a block of about 4 hours where everyone's together in a nice time zone together, which is actually hard for our Indian friends. But brought in a breath coach. So actually dedicated about 15 to 20% of our all hands to someone who was just going to walk us through breathing. And her message was really interesting. I mean, you have to consider this is when you're on an airplane, and it's never happened to me, but when you get told if that little air breather drops down, your job is to make sure that it's on your face first so that you can breathe before tending to others. So I think it's very important for anybody who's on here from a leadership role. I mean, I think we are all leaders in some regard or another, to make sure that we're actually practicing what we would like others to do. So if we want our teams to take more vacation time, it's important that we take it. And we advertise that and we tell people we're taking it. And we don't reply to emails when we're taking that vacation time. If we want to look after ourselves, our mental health, I mean, I think we have to make space for ourselves. It's only then that others will follow us. in that regard, and make the space for everybody to follow you in there. I just think that those things are, you can't template those out. You can't sort of say 20% equals this, 15% equals that. I think it's about sensing where your teams are, and every good leader should have a finger on the pulse and should be doing things to make sure they understand where their team is, and then responding in kind with what's needed and pushing back on others where necessary to give that space for people to operate and to breathe in.
Yeah, I recently listened to this podcast episode featuring an executive coach named Diana Chapman, and she talked a lot about how her belief was burnout actually doesn't come from too much work, but instead not having the space to sort of feel the feelings together of really stressful situations. And I think one of the interesting silver linings of this pandemic that we hear a lot is the humanity that comes to work. And John, you touched on this, and it's something that I think is really important to hold space for. And sometimes that means just having space for people to feel the feelings and connect with one another, and less structure. I know for me, I also have a young child, and so more Zoom meetings is actually, and even if they're wine tasting, kind of be the opposite of what I need. So it definitely is tied to this concept of inclusion as well.
Yeah.
I want to switch over to some of the questions that I see popping up on the board here to make sure that for our last 15 minutes or so, we're addressing what's top of mind for the people on the call. Yes, I think Natalie is zooming in here. What is the most updated or upvoted question? It looks like actually one of the most is upvoted is, how do you manage your team's burnout? We touched on this a bit. Is there anything that this panel didn't address that you find is helpful in addressing and managing burnout, maybe for your team, so also for you personally? What are you doing to manage burnout during this time? John, do you have a thought?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, first of all, burnout is extremely serious. You don't just like, I mean, there've been a lot of articles about this, but it's not like you're running right at the edge and you just take one day off. I mean, burnout can take months and months and months to sort of recover from. And so I think that we actually did go through a moment where things were, I noticed this actually in companies around the world. It was about June, July, August. People were like, we're flying. We're way more productive than we ever thought we would be. We shipped 45 features this quarter. Wow, this is great. Who knew you could be so effective? Basically, people were just not going out. They were working all day. They were putting all their fears and trauma into their work. And leaders were basically hands off, just let everyone type away. They weren't necessarily doing like as much innovative work. They were just doing a lot of crank it out type work that didn't involve a lot of collaboration. And then I noticed this probably around, December, and especially in January, and especially just, right after the election sort of seemed to release this certain amount of trauma in the United States. Like if people finally came to grips with what this had all done to them, and I don't see people bragging about their 45 features shipped a quarter anymore, right? And so I think that the main thing in an environment like we are into now is that you will need to impose an unnatural level of forcing functions to reduce people's need to plow into work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the number one message, is that what seems right, it's just like with how we dealt with the pandemic in many ways, like what seems right now will be unnatural based on the situations we're experiencing. And you need to be a stubborn shit about it. You can't be like, oh, we're just going to take it week by week. It's like you need to impose a certain level of, and dare I even say, sort of like, I'm not in this big top-down thing, but leaders represent this in terms of their actions. You can't just roll with it and be like, oh, wow, but I think we're so much more productive. I don't know, this might even be working. You need to be like, no, burnout happens. Burnout's going to be a problem. I'm going to be stubborn and visionary in this situation, and I'm going to put the brakes on. And so the companies that did that and or did that before the pandemic just had that baked into their culture. Now, a year later, are doing a ton better than the companies that in January and July were amazed that they were being so productive. Anyway, sorry, I've been thinking a lot about that one. So,
I mean, again, to John's version of, and John, thanks very much for sharing that with us. I mean, my heart certainly does go out to, as someone who has two slightly older kids now. I think back to how hard it was. Those are the hard years when you have, 1, 2, 3-year-olds, especially if you have more than one. And, I think a Nobel Peace Prize goes out to anyone who has twins or triplets right now. Those are the hard years. I mean, those really are. My brother has young kids as well. And I keep on telling me, don't worry about anything else. Just worry about getting through the next couple of years, right? But it is much harder now. It's an extra layer of complexity that's thrown on there. But I think that, so if John and I were working on the same team together, John's understanding of what burnout is and what difficulty is, it's kind of like when we talk agile, complexity, right? User story points. It's different per team because the challenges are different. It's almost like that, I think, with individuals as well. And so, I could give you advice on what I do to try and not be burned out and the extracurricular activities that I do. But, me living in a, sort of a town in Connecticut, I can go outside and go for a 3-mile run on a country park. Maybe that's a little harder for someone who lives in San Francisco to do. So I think it's really, really important to work with your team as individuals, a group of individuals who have individual needs, to ensure that you're at least giving them the space to recognize that they need to recover. The recovery from periods of long, burnout type work experiences, I think, is what brings you back and allows you to recoup and get ready for the next push. And I don't really know, we don't really have the recovery. Is the problem right now, and we need to find space to be able to recover.
Yeah, you guys talk a lot about signals, and I think as a leader, or just being a coworker with anyone else, a lot of times people give off signals if they're tired, if they're stressed, or you can just see, maybe we do like a weekly check-in with the team, check-in with each other, and we do look for those signals, and we try to support each other with encouraging, walks. Like instead of being on a Zoom call or WebEx call, just take that call. If it doesn't require a computer, let's just walk together. Or if there's a holiday coming up, let's just add a 3-day weekend, a 4-day weekend, right? So we'll kind of tease each other for if you don't take it, like, oh, like who's not taking this. So I think there's ways to kind of do it as a team to support each other. And something also when we look at the calendars, I think there's like we calculate like 30% of the meetings you can actually control yourself. There's like maybe 60% or maybe 50% that you just kind of have to be on. But there's a large percentage of meetings that you can control yourself. So how you protect your time, and then if you can't protect yourself, then maybe your teammates, as your coworkers, your friends, your peers, can also be on the lookout for you. So just a blend of that has been working for us.
Yeah, there are a couple questions here about, so you touched on protecting your time and avoiding video call overload, but another one is about encouraging asynchronous communication to reduce Zoom fatigue and allow for real work, which I think is similar in nature. Does anyone have any advice or insight about how to create working norms around asynchronous work so that we're not dependent on so many calendar blocks or Zoom meetings, which, as we've heard from many people, can contribute to Zoom fatigue and burnout?
Yeah, I can go first. For asynchronous meeting, before we use Miro, we use a lot of PowerPoint, and it just wasn't collaborative, right? So it's just one person sharing their thought. It's very flat. And part of the burnout is just not meeting. And if you're not meeting, you still want to get stuff done, right? So sometimes, when we're on calls, you can just feel the energy is not there. Then we would just say, like, you know what, let's just everyone go to the Miro board and just add in your thoughts or review this, or if there was some sort of goal, some sort of design that's needed, then Just work on that on the Wednesday, and then we'll look at it then when everyone feels a little bit better, right? So that's an example where you don't, there's a tool in place that can get you what you want. It doesn't have to be on a call, it doesn't have to be together. So that's kind of sometimes how we use it as well.
What I've at least observed about this is that what worries me is that reading a document and commenting on it is still work, And so, setting aside time, it's always funny where, my partner's heads up HR for a big multinational company, and she's sitting and having meetings right there. And it's like, it's the time from 9 p.m. to midnight that she does the asynchronous reading, right? So that's not right in many ways, right? And so I think that the key, if you peel back the layers of this asynchronous question and real work, it's really high work in progress is the culprit for everything. It's that we're trying to, the utilization rates, people are packing every second of their time. And so the way to encourage asynchronous communication is to make sure that there's build slack into people's day so that they can do the asynchronous work and then bring their energy to when synchronous work will be most valuable. What I've observed in some organizations is like, oh my God, why are we having a meeting? Meetings suck, meetings things. And I actually love meetings. Meetings to me are where work can happen between different people. I don't even call it meetings. I just call it just working and collaborating. And so I think that the greater problem here is, poor meeting design, but then also just this Tetris playing of calendars that we're loading each other up with so much work that there's no time to be reflective or read a document or do anything. And so, I don't know, I didn't really answer the question, but I think the root cause of this is too much work in progress. And if you peel that away, then you create environments where you can do more asynchronous communication and make meetings more valuable in general for your synchronous meetings.
Absolutely. David, I'm going to hand you a different question.
Sure.
There's a few on here about Miro specifically, and one's about how you're promoting the use of Miro internally to boost engagement, and then more broadly speaking, getting people engaged in Miro boards, getting leaders involved in Miro boards. What have you been doing at GE?
Well, I'm not really sure I'm promoting Miro necessarily internally. My story with Miro goes back to when it was called real-time boards, and we've been back and forth through trying to get it adopted at a broader level in general for quite some time. But it's really only because it's an extra way, as I think following what John said, it's a way of collaborating that isn't staring at PowerPoints, right? So I've used this personally, and I've given this to others, and others have used this to really be to supplement the type of work that we do. So rather sitting down and making bullet points and talking, we can kind of draw through the process. And one of the lean principles is visualize your work, right? And so this is essentially what we're doing. We're trying to visualize our work. We're trying to contribute all together. I think I talked about the Together Alone system, having time with your post-it notes, so making space during those collaboration meetings where people have time and they can bring it on, and we can then have a mini discussion with regards to what people have put up there. So I've actually found that once people are trying to work through the current situation, are coming to me and saying, how can a collaboration tool like Miro actually help us just get better at that collaboration and work better together? Because there is a strong desire for that, right? I mean, I think everybody, I believe that everybody comes to work wanting to work and wanting to do well and contribute as best they can. And this is just a tool seen to be able to do that. So, this is, I don't have a statistic or a metric in saying that it does boost engagement, because I think that's multivariant. But I definitely see the interest in bringing it to the table. And I get the feedback that this was a good way to work through our current situation to try and get from point A to point B. And I felt included in the process, and I thought that this was pretty cool. So I think that's really, I don't know if there was 2 questions, but that's I think what I can just say from a Miro perspective in our corporation.
Thank you. That is all we have time for. There are so many great questions, so I'm hoping we can address many of them after the call. Thank you so much for,
Thank you so much. This is
for
wonderful.
participating, for your openness. I learned a lot, and I am seeing a lot of good comments in the chat that hopefully we can all review after the call. For everyone who is on the call and interested in the workshop, it will begin in 15 minutes. And as a reminder, workshop is limited to 200 people and required pre-registration. But if you missed it, we will send the recording. We will also send the recording of this panel discussion following the event. Everyone is welcome and encouraged to continue to explore the Miro campus for async networking. And please feel encouraged to leave your feedback on the board. There is a section of the board called the post-event section, and we're looking forward to figuring out how to make these better moving forward, as they are a monthly event series. Thank you all for participating again, Duan, David, and John, and thanks to everyone who attended. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having us. Cheers. Good luck, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you.